Hi, I am Jeana, and welcome to the second in the trauma track as we continue to explore ways that Christian Science has impacted us. I just want to, by way of introduction, my name is Jeana, and I am a counselor in St. Louis, Missouri, and I am a non-CSer. So I have not grown up in Christian Science and only have come about my knowledge having worked with people who have left Christian Science over the years. So I've been working with people in the St. Louis area for about 3.5 years now, and just have been able to glean a lot of interesting and important things, I think, in terms of how to help people move forward. So today we're going to be talking about authority, and we're going to be talking about trust. So as we think about trust, that can be one of the most difficult things to rebuild after leaving Christian Science. Here, everything that you've experienced has now come and been kind of pulled out from under you like a rug. And so what we're going to be doing is talking today about some of the ways that we can trust ourselves and then start to build trust with other people. All right, so what is trust and why is it important? Trust is an indicator of attachment. You'll hear me talk about attachment a lot. That's one of my favorite things in the counseling world. But attachment is simply the connection between two people or things. With spiritual abuse and with cult recovery, we are looking at broken attachments in three key areas. That's the relationship within the self, the relationship with others, and the relationship with God or a higher power. And I think it's important to highlight that those key relationships are all going to be happening at the same time, right? We're going to be dealing with ruptures in each of those relationships at various points at the same time. So it's a bit of a juggling act as we look into how to create safety for you. Okay, let's keep going. Attachment. So attachment is basically what I said, that connection between two people. But I just pulled a few different definitions from the internet and just want to read through a few other things just in case you haven't heard much about attachment or this is a newer concept for you. So attachment is that basic framework for understanding human connection. That is, how well a person connected to others. And early connections establish a pattern for later connections in life. Okay. The second one, neuroscientists believe that attachment is such a primal need that there are networks of neurons in the brain dedicated to setting it in motion in the first place, and a hormone called oxytocin that fosters that process. The third one, the central theme of attachment theory is that primary caregivers who are available and responsive, those are both key words, to an infant's needs allow the child to develop a sense of security. The infant knows that the caregiver is dependable, which creates a secure base for the child to then explore the world. Okay, so from that we kind of glean a few things. One, attachment begins in infancy. It's a biological process. Our brains are wired for connection. Second, attachment informs all of our later relationships. So it creates this structure, this patterning that we later use to develop our relationship patterns, right? So whether we're, a teenager and first starting to date, or whether we're, older and we're maybe married or in a committed relationship of some sort, all of those things are first started, that attachment patterning is started really early on. And finally, insecure attachment styles can be repaired. This is a really, really important key piece, especially as we think about recovery from cults and spiritual abuse. So if attachment styles can be repaired through work, time, and the presence of healthy attachments, then that means whatever we started out with doesn't have to have the final word. And that truly does bring us hope in this area. In the next slide, we see attachment in general. So I like to lay it out as a diamond. Okay, so if you see there in the picture, secure attachment is at the top, and we have several other types. So avoidant and ambivalent and disorganized. And the goal of all of this is to move upward towards healthy, secure attachments. We see that avoidant is more of a standoffishness, it's more of a separation and maybe more of a dissociation. Someone with an avoidant patterning might want to get away when there's a stressful relationship or difficulty in interpersonally. A person who has an ambivalent attachment style tends to be more back and forth, right? So ambivalence meaning holding those two feelings at the same time that are more opposite. We see ambivalence a lot with children who grew up with parents who were sometimes really there and really gave the child what they needed, and other times they were not present. And so the child learned to not know whether the parent would consistently meet their needs or not. And as you can imagine, that creates some problems for a child growing up. If I cry, will my parent answer me? If you're avoidant, then typically that's because the parent didn't answer you or didn't think that those needs that you were expressing were real. And that's especially tricky within Christian Science as we think about matter not being real, right? Those things being an illusion, and we have to escape that reality. All right, and then that fourth category of disorganized attachment is really the combination of avoidant and ambivalent. So when there's extreme trauma or neglect in childhood, we often see this disorganized pattern. And that's really important just to note that it's both. So if you see pieces of both in yourself, that's actually really normal. Everybody on earth has some sort of an attachment patterning, and most of us tend towards either avoidant or ambivalent. If we kind of oscillate between the two, that's when we might have more of an disorganized attachment. All right, just in terms of history, here we've got some of the Christian Science things that I've been able to put together, having worked with people from Christian Science for several years now. So teachings that detract from attachment that I've noticed may include not responding to physical and medical needs, teaching that matter is not real, and not validating or helping a child explore their inner emotional world. So that patterning often reflects that of a child who has undergone severe neglect. This tends to result in those insecure attachment patterns that we were talking about. So that could be avoidant if the parent consistently didn't respond to signal cries or needs, or it could be ambivalent if the parent was sometimes very present and sometimes very absent, so inconsistent in their response. Or it could be disorganized if both patterns were present in some combination. Again, we see that one a lot when there is a lot of extreme abuse or neglect, or a combination of both. And just remember that earning secure attachment often requires that the Christian Science member finds healthy, secure relationships and or undertakes the work of reparenting himself or herself. So this is very extensive work and one that's best done with a professional, but that can help an XCS member to experience growth despite starting from a relational deficit in terms of attachment. And again, I don't want that to seem like you've done anything wrong. In fact, quite the opposite. You've done nothing wrong, and that's part of what makes this such a difficult thing to talk about, is that you didn't have any choice. And so there's some grieving to say, even if my parents loved me, they didn't give me what I needed in order to thrive in the world. And I also put a little asterisk there. So please note that relational deficit can exist even if the parent is loving and caring. Often these parents are not aware of what they're doing or what the child needs at the time, but they're doing their best. And also note that in second generation or multi-generation contexts, they are just passing down what they know. So that's why that is so dangerous, is that we start to repeat patterns, and that patterning tends to be learned from the previous generation. So let's say your grandparents grew up in this and their parents were Christian Science, and they're going to pass that down to your parents, right? And that's just the way that you parent a child, right? You just ignore them. You just put them in their crib. You let them cry it out to the point where they stop crying, right? Because they don't know that you're going to respond. And then you pass that down, right? So that's part of what we get to do as ex-Christian Science members and those supporting them, is to help them to change those patternings so that the next generation after you has a chance at something different, right? And it's never too late to start that process. Remember that attachment repair is possible across the lifespan. Your brain is capable of healing thanks to neuroplasticity. I love that word. It really just means the ability of your brain to form new neural pathways. Recent brain research has shown that your brain can heal and it can form new neural pathways. Guys, that's amazing. The way that God made the body to be able to regenerate and heal and repair is nothing short of miraculous. Healing attachment within yourself. All right, so let's say you've identified that there are some attachment issues and you're not sure if you can trust yourself, much less anybody else. Let's start within that relationship with yourself. Your attachment with yourself is primarily how much you trust the feedback your body, mind, and emotions are giving you. Okay, so while this is an obvious challenge for XCS members, there are a few things we can do to focus on to help us grow in this internal sense of trust. All right, so basically, you have been taught to disregard what your body and your emotions, and to a large extent even your mind, are telling you, right? So these things that are part of the teachings of Mary Baker Eddy are illogical. They are disconnected, they are disembodied. Okay, so part of what we can do is we can turn that around on itself and start to trust our gut again. Okay, so trusting your gut is not incongruent with a Christian position. I get this a lot, and I just want to say that whether you're coming from a Christian position or are still exploring what to do after leaving Christian Science, I just want to remind you that this doesn't have to be incongruent with either one. There's a huge practice of meditation and mindfulness in the secular world, and those things can be focused on scripture or on the character of God if you want those things to be within a Christian focus. So remember that idea of imago Dei. That Latin term just means being made in the image of God. And it means that our body and our self reflect somehow the character of God. We're in a fallen condition, but there is still something about us that reflects that character of God. And as we trust our own gut, we're also tuning into God and the Spirit in us, right? So I just want to head that off at the pass in case that's part of your complaint, is that maybe that's not congruent with a Christian position, or it seems new agey, or it seems like some other potential cult or downfall. I just want to assure you that that's not necessarily the case. It really just matters what you focus on. If we worship the body versus if we attune to the body and we start to learn what it's telling us and how to take those things in. The second point is to practice mindfulness. So we talked about meditation. Mindfulness simply is learning to train your awareness and bring it into focus on something. Right? That could be a candle. That could be, there's a classic exercise in DBT, which is one of the things that I have worked with in the past, where you explore a raisin and you spend probably a good 5 minutes just exploring this raisin. You look at it, you roll it over in your fingers, you smell it, you explore the ridges, and you really start to get to know this raisin. You put it in your mouth and you still explore it with your tongue and moving it around, tasting the flavor and experiencing the different textures that raisin has to offer. Mindfulness is slowing down like that. Many people coming from a faith perspective choose to meditate or reflect on God or scripture, and that is so helpful. Also, learning to recognize and name emotions and how emotions feel in your body can be a powerful mindfulness practice for former Christian Science people. One of the ways you might do this is to say, when you start to notice, let's say you notice anger, right? That's one that a lot of Christian Science people are not very comfortable with. And if you're in that category, you're in good company. But I would say that when you start to feel anger, instead of trying not to feel angry because you're saying that it's bad, what if you take that anger and you imagine holding it here and trying to externalize it from you just a little bit so that you can look at it? Does that anger have a color? Does that anger have a shape? Is it some sort of object, or is it maybe it's a sphere, maybe it's a cube, maybe it's a squishy blob? It really doesn't matter. The point is that you're trying to identify how that anger, what what qualities that anger has, right? Another step to that would be saying, where in my body do I feel angry? Do I feel my hands ball up into fists ready for a fight? Or maybe I feel tension through my chest and my shoulders. I might notice my face coming in together. As I notice those things in my body, what I'm doing is I'm tracking that integration of my body, mind, emotions, and thoughts. And as we do that, those things are going to create that mindfulness. It's like a muscle. So the more we practice mindfulness, the more we will be able to practice mindfulness. The more you spend time in quiet time, the more you're able to spend time in quiet time. So that's another great way for us to start healing our attachment within ourselves. And third, safety is of utmost importance. We are most able to grow when we are not in the fight, flight, and freeze mode. So learning what safety feels like takes time and practice. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next session as we talk about triggers. But just in terms of safety, it's important that mindfulness includes, do I feel safe here with this material in this context? And do I not feel safe because it's just unfamiliar? Or do I not feel safe because there's something awry? There's some piece here that reminds me of past trauma or a Wednesday night testimony service or whatever it might be. So it's important to just tune in with yourself in that respect. Another thing that we can do is to use PACE as an attachment reminder. So a helpful way to remember some of the basic principles of attachment is through the acronym PACE. And this is work developed by Daniel Hughes. He works with children and has developed some resources, and I've linked his website in the resources page later on. So I'd love for you to go and explore some of what he's done and just read about how he's developed these approaches. So starting with PACE, the P stands for playfulness. So as we're applying this to ourself and relationship with ourself, keeping a light mood within yourself as you learn something new. Okay, I am in my 30s and I know that as somebody in their 30s, it's hard to learn something new. I am constantly helping my kids, whether it's my daughter got a longboard and I was trying to hop on and trying to help her, and I am not as coordinated as she is. And learning something new is tricky. My nephew got a hoverboard and I'm looking at this piece of technology like, wow, I am so old. But it's also good to have a sense of humor about yourself, to be able to laugh at yourself, to be able to try new things. So as you explore attachment with yourself, as you start to sit with mindfulness and emotions, keep a light mood. Let yourself be playful with yourself. And just laugh. You know, something goes wrong, don't feel that sense of condemnation. Try to reframe it as, oh my gosh, that was really funny. Or I bet that looked good on film. You know, just kind of switch those things around to where we're focusing on playfulness and not keeping things so serious. Another way to increase attachment is through acceptance. With yourself, this is reminding yourself that you are created in the image of God and that you are doing your best to learn new things. You grew up in Christian Science. Do you accept that about yourself? That's part of your story. It's not part of my story. I have a different story, and I have to accept my own story. But as Christian Science has shaped you, part of it is accepting this is where I'm at, and this is the reality of my experience in this world right now. C stands for curiosity, adopting a posture of self-discovery and questioning. Why you do things the way you do and what might be underneath those various behaviors. I hope that you're seeing how playfulness and curiosity go together, because they absolutely do. As we think about curiosity, imagine a child exploring the world and not really having the vocabulary to talk about it, not having the science classes or the math classes or the English classes, like all of the education that you might have at this point, that at least teaches you something, even if it doesn't teach you everything or it teaches you from a limited perspective. Those things teach you, and they teach you how to learn. Explore it as somebody learning for the first time, right? As somebody visiting a new planet and exploring what that new planet is like. Don't take anything for granted. Be curious. And then finally, that E stands for empathy. Being patient with yourself and acknowledging that what you are doing is hard and it really isn't fair. You are grieving not being taught these self-attachment principles as a child or young adult. And remember that you are not alone. And there are other XCS members who are going through similar processes. But it is worth it to start to understand that relationship within yourself and start to heal and repair that is profound. I've seen it happen, and I really want to invite you into that space as well. Again, PACE can be found on the website as a model created by Daniel Hughes. So how do I learn to trust others again? Okay, so we've been talking about attachment within the self, but let's see if we can transfer that to attachment with others. What would that even look like? I just wrote down a few tips for attaching safely with others. First of all, remember that not everyone is trustworthy. Okay, we can go into those next relationships too quickly. So first, focus on your own gut and when and how you feel safe. Take your time. Take it really, really slow and evaluate often. It's okay to take your time. There is no artificial timeline for how someone recovers from being in a cult. Be careful not to impose an artificial timeline on yourself. Nobody's grading you. There's no lesson sets. You may make some progress and come back, and that's okay. Just keep exploring and keep being curious with yourself, and I think you'll find that it's easier to keep taking one step at a time. Next, balance risk-taking in relationships with safety finding. Okay, so anytime we engage in relationship, there's some level of risk, right? If we have been in relationship with a person for a long time, there is less risk, right? Because they have proven themselves over time to be safe. So we want to really challenge ourselves to balance those things. Don't feel like you have to run into the burning fire, right? Take your time. Take those steps one at a time. If you do decide to run into that burning fire, let's say you go back to a celebration of life service or a funeral or something with your family who's maybe still in Christian Science, make sure you surround that time with safety finding time, right? Maybe that's some really solid self-care. Maybe that's bringing along with you some safe people. Maybe that's limiting the time that you're in the environment that's challenging. But really tune in with your gut again and balance that risk-taking with the safety finding. It is okay to not trust at first or to allow trust to be earned over time. I think a lot of times, especially in what I notice to be religious or Christian circles, we can put this unnecessary expectation ourselves that we will trust other people. As you see there in Psalm 118, it's better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in man. God knows that we as people are not fully trustworthy. I don't know about you, but I break people's trust. I'm assuming that we all do at some point, but there's one who doesn't, right? If you believe in God and want to understand true safe attachment, it's with Him, right? He's the one who is perfect and is able to maintain that attachment. If you're not coming from a faith perspective, that's okay too. Figure out what that is that you hold on to, or where you find that safety. What is your refuge? If it's not God, what is your refuge? And how can you push towards creating that space that is safe for you? I just want to finish with a few just general resources. I talked a lot about attachment today, and there is a fantastic ebook called Healing Your Attachment Wounds. It's an ebook by Diane Poole Heller, and it is just an incredible resource for recovering if you have identified attachment wounds. The book also includes some practical mindfulness exercises in finding safety and strengthening secure attachments. And we're actually going to end with one of those in just a minute. The second resource I've put up here is Bold Love by Allender and Longman. This book helps us to draw a model for boundary making from the wisdom literature and the Bible. The last 3 chapters in particular are on how to love a normal sinner, how to love a fool, and how to love an evil person. And those are especially helpful when you're thinking about how to create boundaries with people from a more Christian perspective. And then finally, I mentioned earlier that PACE model that was created by Daniel Hughes, and you can find more info about him and his work on his website, www.danielhughes.org/p.a.c.e. HTML. So I'd love for you to check out some of those things. And finally, in this last 5 minutes or so, we're just going to do an exercise. So I mentioned mindfulness quite a bit throughout this session, and I just wanted to end with a little bit of mindfulness for you. So if you're here in this session with me, I want you to just take a minute and take some deep breaths. You can turn off your camera if you like. You can close your eyes. You can do whatever makes you feel comfortable in this moment. And I just want you to start to breathe. Okay, that's all we're going to do at first, is just notice that breath. Feel that breath as it comes in through your nose, down into your lungs. And then imagine as that oxygen oxygenates the blood, and that oxygen goes to the various parts of your body through the bloodstream. With every pump of the heart, that oxygen goes further and further until it's returned to those lungs, deoxygenated and ready to be expelled. As you breathe out, feel the air in your mouth and your nose. Do you naturally breathe out from your nose or your mouth? What would it feel like to blow it out as if through a straw? As you do that again, just feel your lungs as they deflate. Feel your body as it gains some calmness. I just want you to be curious with yourself for a minute. After listening to all that on attachment and on building trust, how do you feel in yourself? How do you feel in your mind? What thoughts do you have racing through your head? You don't have to stop them. Just notice that they're there. Bring your attention back to those thoughts. If you notice your mind start to wander, that's okay. Just notice that and bring it back. Next, move to your emotions. Take a minute and assess your emotional state. How do you feel right now? Do you feel overwhelmed or discouraged? Do you feel hopeful, energized? Do you feel comforted? Maybe you feel like you're not alone. Whatever those feelings, they're okay here. I'm going to challenge you to take that just one step further. How does that feeling, whatever that feeling is, how does that feel in your body? Where in your body do you notice that emotion getting lodged? Maybe you notice it in your feet or your legs and you want to run. Maybe you notice it in your hands and you're fidgety. Maybe you notice it as tightness or pressure in your chest, or as a pit in your gut. Maybe you feel tension in your head or in your eyes. Wherever you feel that, just want you to focus on it. And as you focus on it, return back to the breath. Breathe in, imagining that that oxygen is going straight to that spot in your body, that it is bringing life and health and energy and oxygen, power to that spot. Doesn't have to make that emotion go away, but just imagine that interaction, right? Feeling like we're doing something to notice and expose and give voice to those emotions. Take as much time here as you might need. This does conclude our session. But if you need to stay here in this moment and continue to breathe and relax, it's perfectly fine. Take those deep breaths as you learn to trust yourself and repair parts of that relationship with yourself. Thank you for your time.